Hello again, and welcome to a quiet moment away from the rush of the present. Tonight, as the sky darkens and the stars slip into view, we travel not only through time, but deeper still, into the breathless stillness of forgotten rooms, crumbling towers, and the pages of a book that no longer exists, wherever you are beneath the covers. Resting after a long day, or simply sitting in quiet, know that I'm glad to have you here. Let the rhythm of this story guide you gently into slumber. Let me ask you something. Have you ever felt the strange weight of an unopened door? Not one that bars your path in waking life, but one that lingers at the edge of dreams always locked, always waiting. This is the story of a door like that, and the man who spent his life trying to open it. His name was Emmerich Haver, but history remembers him only by a title whispered in footnotes, the Iron Scholar. He lived during the early decades of the 14th century, in the waning light of a fading kingdom, a time when superstition walked hand in hand with science, and truth was something you felt long before you could prove it. He was not born into wealth or nobility. His father was a stonemason, and his mother a spinner of flax. Their home sat at the edge of the old town of Liora village, so remote that even the kings forgot its name. But high above that village, at the edge of the woods, stood a tower made of black ironstone. It had no door that anyone could find. No one knew who built it, and no one had ever been able to get inside, except Emmerich. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Emmerich's fascination with the tower began when he was just a boy. His father would often find him staring up at it from the fields, his small face tilted toward the sky, his eyes tracing the silhouette of that impossible structure. The villagers said it was cursed. Some said it had been a prison for a witch. Others believed it was the remnant of a forgotten age, when giants walked the earth and melted stones with their hands. Emmerich didn't believe in curses. Not then. He believed in patterns. He began to sketch the tower again and again in his notebook's pages, filled with loops and angles and strange geometric diagrams. At school, he had no patience for scripture or military histories. But when the traveling scholar from Eros came through the village, Emmerich traded a whole sack of turnips for a single hour of his time. That was how he learned about the ancient art of alchemy, not the kind you read about in school books today. This was something older, something slower, less about turning lead into gold, and more about turning ignorance into understanding. When Emmerich turned 16, he left home with nothing but a pouch of coins, 3 of his notebooks, and the strange copper key he'd found buried beneath the ivy at the base of the iron tower. It was curved like a question mark and warm to the touch. Even in winter, he never told anyone he had it. Years passed, decades. Emmerich studied in cloisters and forgotten abbeys. He pored over scrolls that had no known author and learned languages that only monks still spoke. He corresponded with old men who called themselves philosophers, and young women who whispered to stars. He never settled. He never married. He never stopped thinking about the tower. It remained untouched, cold, and silent in the hills above Garland. But Emmerich believed it was more than just a building. He believed it was a library, not a library of books, but of knowledge itself, encoded in the very structure, waiting for the right mind to decode it. At the age of 41, with streaks of gray in his hair and the copper key always hidden beneath his tunic, Emmerich returned to Garland. The village was smaller now, and quieter. The old mayor was gone, replaced by his soft-spoken granddaughter. The fields were less fertile. The trees in the wood had grown thicker, but the tower hadn't changed. Not a single stone was out of place. Emmerich made camp at its base and began to record everything, the way the moonlight bent across its surface, the patterns in the lichen, the faint hum barely audible when he pressed his ear to the walls. The villagers watched from afar. They didn't come near. Children whispered about the ghost man in the hills. Then, one night, it happened. A storm rolled in from the north, thick clouds, low thunder, no rain. Emmerich was sitting by the base of the tower, lantern flickering, reading one of his oldest notebooks, when he felt the ground tremble. It wasn't much, just a whisper under the stones. Then the copper key grew hot, burning hot. He dropped it, and it sank into the soil, like butter under a knife. When he reached down to dig for it, his fingers found not soil but stone, a square outline, just large enough for a door. He hadn't found the door before because it didn't exist. Not until he was ready. That was the first lesson. He worked all night, clearing the earth, brushing away roots. And just before dawn, the door opened. No creaking hinges. No dramatic wind. It simply was open. Beyond it, stairs spiraled downward, not up, as he had imagined. Down into the dark. He didn't hesitate. He stepped inside. The air was cool and dry. No dust. No cobwebs. As if time had stopped the moment it was sealed. He descended slowly, his lantern casting long shadows across the iron walls. Symbols lined the passageway, symbols he recognized from dreams, from books that didn't have titles. At the bottom of the stairs, he found the first room. It was small, bare. A single table stood in the center, upon which lay an open book. It was written in no language he recognized, but as he stared at the pages, the words began to rearrange themselves. Not physically, not visibly, but in his mind. He read, until his lantern flickered out. Then he slept. When he awoke, he was no longer sure how long he'd been there. The book was gone. The room was different. A second door stood open on the far wall. He stepped through it. That's how the tower worked. Each room revealed something different, something personal, sometimes a truth, sometimes a lie you had to confront. One room showed him memories he didn't remember making. Another held a mirror that refused to reflect him. In one chamber, he aged 40 years in the span of a breath, only to return to himself when he crossed the threshold again. Time meant nothing here, but purpose did. The tower was testing him. Each level, each trial, asked the same question in different forms. Are you ready to understand? By the 7th room, Emmerich no longer felt hunger or thirst. He no longer remembered how many days had passed. He only knew that he was closer than ever to unlocking the final secret. And then, at the heart of the tower, he found the last door. It was made not of metal or wood, but of light and silence. No keyhole, no handle, but it pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Emmerich placed his hand against it, and it spoke, not aloud, not in words, but in memory. It showed him the day he found the key, buried beneath the ivy. It showed him the face of the girl he once loved, but left behind. It showed him the faces of the villagers, worried, waiting, and then it asked, "Will you step through, knowing you cannot return?" Emmerich took one breath, then another, and he stepped forward. But that's not where the story ends. No. Emmerich's journey through the tower was only the beginning. In the next part of our tale, we'll follow the footsteps he left behind, marks in the dust, pages in forgotten books, and the whispers of those who claimed to have seen the tower glow under the winter moon. For now, let this tale rest with you. Let the quiet of the Iron Scholar's path ease your breath. The night is long, and your dreams are waiting. Sleep well. They said the tower disappeared after that night. One moment, it loomed above the village, like it always had, dark, unmoving, eternal. The next, it was gone. Vanished, as if the land had swallowed it. No smoke, no fire. Just silence. Some say the fog came in thick from the eastern hills, and when it cleared, only the grass remained. Others claimed they saw a single flash of green light rise up through the clouds like the breath of some great beast retreating into the sky. The villagers didn't speak of it openly, not for fear of ridicule, but because they didn't know how to shape their thoughts into words. Something had changed, and they all felt it somewhere deep in the marrow. A strange weight lifted, and yet a new silence took its place. But the story didn't vanish with the tower, and neither did Emmerich, because this is where the journey truly begins. When Emmerich stepped through the final door, he expected the unknown, but not this. It was a room, though the word feels too small for what it held. There were no walls, no corners, just space unending, dim, glowing softly from nowhere in particular. The ground beneath his feet was smooth like marble, but dark as riverstone. His footsteps made no sound. He looked behind him. The doorway was gone. There was no going back. And yet, he wasn't afraid. Before him stood a pedestal. Upon it, a single glass orb, clear as rain, pulsing faintly with a rhythm he knew wasn't his own. Around it, empty air. Above it, what looked like stars. Or maybe memories. It was impossible to tell. He stepped closer. The orb flickered, then filled with a soft, swirling mist. And in that mist, Emmerich saw a face, his own, but younger, much younger, a boy with wide eyes, sitting in a field at dusk, tracing shapes in the dirt. The same field below the tower, the same boy he once was. Then the image changed. Now it showed his father's workshop, the air full of sawdust, beams half-carved, ropes coiled neatly by the window. He could smell the wood, hear the hammer's soft rhythm, then his mother's voice, humming a song she claimed was older than the village itself. The mist shifted again. The day he found the key, the ground soft beneath his palms, the ivy curling away like it had been waiting, the way the metal had warmed in his hand, though the morning frost still clung to the leaves. It played, moment after moment, not like a story, but like recognition. A quiet unveiling, not showing him something new, but something forgotten. Emmerich realized this wasn't a room to explore. It was a room that explored him. The orb dimmed, and then it spoke not with sound, but in thought, unfolding inside his mind like a paper slowly unwrapping itself. You are known. It was not a greeting, nor a judgment, it was a fact. He waited, the silence returned. But now he felt something else, a presence, gentle and immense. Like the hush before snowfall, something watching. Not with eyes, but with memory. Emmerich stepped back. He looked upward, hoping for a ceiling, a sky, anything. But the space offered no answers. Only the quiet. Then, in the distance, a second light appeared. He turned toward it. Each step he took felt longer than the last, as if space was bending. Around him, or perhaps time was shifting beneath his feet. There was no fatigue, only a strange sensation as though his body was moving forward, while his mind hovered just behind. The second light grew larger. It too was an orb, resting on a pedestal. But this one shimmered with color-deep blues, flickering, gold, and the green of forests seen in dreams. As Emmerich approached, this orb did not show his past. It showed a door, not the tower door. A different one. Wooden, worn smooth by hands and years. The kind of door that led to a home. He felt his breath catch in his throat, because he knew that door. It was from a memory. He had buried long ago the home of an old woman who once lived. By the river, a healer. Some said which others said saint. Her name was Liora. He had visited her only once, as a boy of 11. He had scraped his knee on a jagged rock, and his mother had taken him to Liora when the wound grew hot. Liora had barely spoken, only hummed and laid crushed yarrow on the wound. But before he left, she had looked at him with eyes the color of cold tea and said, "You'll go where others cannot. And the cost will not be yours to pay at least not at first." He had forgotten her words, but now the orb reminded him. And then it showed something else, a map, but not of places. A map of choices, moments in his life where paths had quietly diverged, small decisions, unnoticed at the time, that had shaped everything. The time he chose to buy a certain book in a second-hand stall. The letter he didn't send. The walk he took instead of attending a lecture. Each small turn had led him here to this moment, to this room, to being known. Then came the third light, and this one did not rest on a pedestal. It hovered, suspended in mid-air, spinning gently like a moon turning on its axis. It pulsed once as he approached, and everything else, the floor, the space, the air grew still. Inside this final orb, there was no image, only a question, but it wasn't in words. It was feeling. It asked, "Are you willing to let go of who you were, to become what you were meant to be?" Emmerich did not answer with speech. He stepped forward and placed his hand on the orb. It shattered like glass, made of light, and the world changed. Suddenly, he was no longer in a room. He stood in a field, not unlike the one from his childhood, but unfamiliar all the same. The air smelled of sage and rain. A soft wind rustled the grass. In the distance, a mountain range he had never seen stretched across the horizon behind him. The tower had returned, but it was different now, shorter, broader, and the ironstone gleamed with symbols. He could finally read. Not because they had changed, but because he had. He reached for the copper key around his neck. It was gone, replaced by a mark. On his palm an echo of the shattered orbs. Light, not a wound, not a burn. Just a symbol, quiet and pulsing. He wasn't Emmerich Haver anymore. Not exactly. He had become what the tower had always intended. A keeper, a translator, a bridge between what was known and what was still waiting. And so, he began to walk. Through grass wet with dew. Toward something unseen, but deeply understood. Because the final lesson of the tower was simple. When the door opens, it is not the tower that changes, it is you. And the world is never the same again. Soft instrumental hum. Then a calm voice begins. Welcome back. Tonight, we continue our slow, quiet descent through the lost corridors of time. Let your body settle, your breath deepen, and your thoughts, let them drift gently, like candle smoke, rising in still air in the last part of our story. Emmerich Haver, the Iron Scholar, stepped beyond the final door, within the mysterious Black Tower. What he found was not an end, but a transformation. And now he walks a path not marked on any map. K-path that does not lead home. The field stretched for miles. Cool mist curled low against the ground, threading through the grass like a veil. The light was strange, neither day nor night, but something in between. Not gray, not golden. A light that seemed to come from the sky itself, without source, without sun. Emmerich walked without knowing how long. He did not hunger, he did not tire. Time, like everything else, had taken on a new rhythm. The mark on his palm left by the orb of light glowed, faintly with every step. It was not painful. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat. The world around him was silent, but it was not empty. There was presence here, everywhere, as if the land itself remembered. He crossed a shallow stream, its waters so clear they seemed invisible, revealing smooth stones beneath, shaped like stars and spirals. The current whispered secrets as it passed. He paused, dipped his fingers in, and the water grew warm, then cold, then warm again as if testing him. Beyond the stream, the grass gave way to a winding path, made not of stone, but of countless bones. Not human, not animal. Bones of things that had never breathed in our world. They crunched softly beneath his boots, but did not break. And still he walked, until he reached the first threshold. It looked like a ruin at first, a crumbling arch of pale stone, leaning against nothing. Ivy curled around it, though there were no walls, no gate, no road beyond. But as Emmerich approached, the arch shimmered symbols flickered across its surface. Some he recognized from the tower. Others were new. They moved, changed, whispered. As he drew nearer, then a voice, not a human voice, but something softer, more ancient, rose from the ground itself. He comes who carries the mark. Let the veil part, and the arch pulsed. Emmerich stepped through. The world changed instantly. He now stood in a circular hall, impossibly vast. Pillars of crystal soared above, catching the strange ambient light and bending it into cascades of color across the floor. The air smelled of rain and ash. Around the edge of the hall sat 12 figures, hooded and still. They did not rise, they did not speak. But Emmerich felt their attention settle on him like a heavy cloak. At the center of the hall, a pool of silver. Liquid rippled gently, though there was no wind. Then one of the figures finally spoke. A woman's voice, low, calm, measured. The tower did not open you. You opened it. Emmerich stepped forward. I only followed the signs. I did not know where they would lead. Another voice answered. This one male, older, weary. Few do. Fewer still return. He looked around. What is this place? The figures exchanged no glances, but something passed among them. A third voice, sharp, precise, Iskareth. The circle of memory. We are the last keepers. they explained, slowly, like speaking to a fevered patient. The tower he entered was one of 12, scattered across the forgotten edges of the world, hidden not just by geography, but by time and mind. Each tower contained a gate not to a new place, but to a deeper truth, and those who passed through were transformed. Not all survived, knowing fewer still returned whole. Those who did, came here. Iskareth, the city that remembers, a place built not of stone, but of stories. And Emmerich had entered its heart. He was given a chamber to rest. Not that he needed sleep, exactly, but his thoughts felt heavy, full of echo and vision. The chamber held no bed, only a wide bench carved from living wood, a basin of clear water, and a single parchment scroll hanging from the wall. It read, "What you remember is not what happened. What happened is not what matters. What matters is what you choose to become now." He sat in silence for what may have been hours, or days. Dreams came not from his mind, but from the walls. A child's laughter echoing down a well. A door closing in a forest with no trees. A glass library suspended in fog. He woke or rose not sure he had ever truly slept, and someone was waiting for him. Her name was Asera, one of the 12. Her hood was down now, revealing a face lined with age, but not weariness. Her eyes were like iron wrapped in silk. She walked with a quiet confidence, her robes whispering across the floor like wind through dry grass. "Come," she said simply. They walked in silence, down corridors that did not stay the same. Doors that opened and led to staircases going, sideways halls that widened when no one watched. The city was alive, but not in the way animals are. It breathed through memory, shifted through will. She led him to a garden, a perfect circle of black stones, surrounded by flowering trees that bore no fruit, only glowing orbs that pulsed faintly in the dusk. Each tree had a name carved at its base. Isera stopped before one. "Emmerich." "Havar," she said. "This is your tree." He blinked. "But I've just arrived. You arrived long ago. You just weren't ready to see it." He reached out. The bark was warm, not rough, not smooth, almost like skin. The orb above shimmered inside it, a vision. A young girl, perhaps 10 years old, standing before the iron tower with a map clutched in her hand. Her hair was the color of sunlight on old pages. Isera nodded slowly. "She is the next." Emmerich's mouth was dry. "I don't understand." Isera turned to him, her voice soft. "The towers call to those who listen, but the call does not always follow time. She will enter the tower you left behind, but to her, it has never vanished." He stared at the vision. The girl looked up at the tower, eyes filled with wonder and fear. "Will she survive?" He asked. Isera looked at him with something close to sorrow. "She will become as you did, as we all did. The question is not whether she survives. It is whether she remembers who she was once the doors open." That night, Emmerich sat beneath his tree, watching the glowing orb sway in windless air. He remembered everything. Now, every room, every lesson, every silence, and yet, he felt the story was not done. The mark on his palm pulsed once, softly, then again, and again. He stood, and somewhere far beyond the fields, the iron tower stirred, because once a door opens, it never truly closes. Tonight, as you lie still beneath the hush of night, allow the weight of the day to loosen its hold. Let the rustle of time settle around you like silk, and breathe slow, like dusk moving across an ancient land. You've returned back into the folds of a story that walks with quiet feet, through corridors of memory and invention. In our last part, Emmerich Havar was taken into the timeless city of Iskareth, where memory is planted like trees, and the past echoes with every footstep. There, beneath a flowering tree, he glimpsed a girl, unknown to him, but known to the tower. A girl holding a map, standing at the threshold he once crossed. Tonight, we follow her, not into the future, but into a different kind of now. Her name was Liora. 10 years old, small for her age, with a sharp chin and quiet eyes that always looked just past the things she was told to focus on. She had been born in a town that no longer had a name. A place on the edge of the map, quite literally. The very margin of a page in a book of geography no one had opened in decades. Liora's world was one of corners, narrow streets, small rooms, and grown-ups with narrow dreams. But Liora did not live in corners. She lived in possibilities. She kept a journal, bound in old leather, filled with sketches of places she had never been, not imagined exactly but remembered from dreams. Dreams of spiraling towers, of doorways carved from iron, of staircases that bent like question marks, and of a key, always the key. She had drawn it, 57 times each, one slightly different, sometimes bronze, sometimes silver. Always warm, always waiting. The day it happened began like any other. The market smelled of salt and old apples. The sky was the color of worn linen. Liora walked with her uncle, who sold dyes and fabrics. She hated the market. Too many elbows. Too many shouted numbers. But that morning, as they passed a stone wall covered in ivy, something stopped her. A glint, just one flash of copper, buried beneath the green. Liora stepped closer, drawn by a quiet pull. She parted the leaves, and there it was. A key, exactly like the one in her dreams. It hung from a rusted nail, its teeth strange and irregular, as if meant not to open a door but to unlock a question. She looked up, behind the ivy-covered wall. The tower, it was taller than she'd ever imagined. Black stone, no windows, just one door. No one remembered when it had been built, or who had lived there. It had always been there, the way the moon was always there and changing, distant, and full of mystery. Liora stood for a long time at the threshold. The key hummed in her hand, not like a sound, more like a memory remembering itself. She looked back. The market bustled on. Her uncle argued over thread. Count with a woman selling onions. She stepped forward. The door opened, not with a creak or groan. Just a simple, absolute shift, like it had been waiting. Inside, the tower was still. Not dark, not light, just present. The walls glowed faintly, as if lit by old memories. The floor was warm beneath her feet. The air smelled of ink and moss, and something like old rain. The first room was round. A single pedestal stood in the center, upon it a book, not bound, not closed. It fluttered gently, like breathing. Liora approached, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of the tower. She looked down. The book contained her handwriting, pages filled with her drawings, her maps, her notations, but aged, yellowed, as though written decades before she was born. She turned the page, a drawing of the tower, another page, a map with her own footprints, sketched in ink, another map. Message written in a neat, careful hand she recognized, but had never seen before. Liora, your path has already begun. You were not led here. You led yourself. She swallowed hard. Something shifted behind her. Another doorway. She turned and walked through. The staircase curved like a shell. Each step hummed faintly. Beneath her she counted the steps as she climbed. 32, 50, 91. At the 100th, she paused. The wall beside her bore a mark. A symbol she had once seen in a dream, a circle, with a line through it, and 4 dots around the edge. She touched it. The wall softened, melted, revealed a new passage. She stepped through it. Was a room made of mirrors, but not mirrors that reflected her. Each panel showed a possibility. One showed her as a grown woman, standing at the helm of a ship made of bone, sailing across a starless sea. Another showed her in a library, suspended, upside down, reading a book that changed each time she blinked. Another showed her as a tree, roots buried deep, branches stretching into a sky filled with moons. And another showed her with a man, older, wiser, his hand glowing with a mark. He looked down at her with eyes that had seen the end of many things. He said only one word: remember. And the mirror went dark. Liora turned. The room was no longer there. Instead, she stood in a forest, not outside, inside the tower. Trees rose in silence, their trunks etched with symbols. Leaves shimmered with silver light. A wind blew, though the air was still. She felt the tower breathing again, but now, it breathed with her. She wandered between the trees, guided not by sight, but by pull. A sense that something awaited just ahead. She came to a clearing dot in the center. A pool of still water, at its edge. A figure, a woman, tall, cloaked in robes that flickered like the surface of a pond. Her face was calm, kind, but not soft. She looked up. Liora, the girl blinked. Do I know you? The woman tilted her head. Not yet, but you will. She gestured to the pool. Look, not forward, not back, just through. Liora leaned over. In the reflection she saw herself, but older, stronger, alone. But not lonely. Walking through the world with fire in one hand and ink in the other. Then the water shimmered and showed her the tower empty, silent, but waiting. The woman spoke again. The key brought you here. But the tower opened because it knew you. You carry something very few ever will. Liora stepped back. What do I carry? The woman smiled softly. The memory of what the world forgot. You are a keeper, not of history, of possibility. And then, she was gone. The trees vanished, the pool faded, and Liora stood once more in the first room, the pedestal before her. The book closed, but beside it, a new object, a scroll. She reached out, unrolled it. It was a letter, signed in neat handwriting, she. Now remembered fully, Immerich, Havar. It read, The tower is not a place. It is a question. Each person answers it differently. Mine led me to memory. Yours will lead you beyond. When the door opens again, do not ask why. Ask what now. Because now, it is your turn. She closed her eyes. The tower pulsed once more. She wasn't afraid. She was ready. Let the sounds of the waking world drift behind you like the tide slipping back into the sea. With each breath, you step softly from what is, into what was, and into what could be, tonight. We do not return where we left off. Tonight, we move forward further still. We follow Liora, the girl who dreamed in maps, as she steps not beyond a door, but between moments. A place where time holds its breath, where silence has a name, and the stars do not shine. The scroll in her hand had faded, not from age, but from completion, as if it had spoken all it needed to speak. Liora stood in the tower's central chamber. Around her, the walls pulsed with slow, quiet light. The book had closed, the pool had stilled. The woman by the water had vanished, but the pull remained. A gentle magnetism. Not forward, not back. Down, down, a spiral stair revealed itself, hidden beneath the floor, which softened as she approached, becoming less stone and more thought with each step downward. The world grew quieter, not simply silent, but emptied. She stopped, listening for sound, because there was nothing left to hear, not even her own breath. The stairs ended in a door, no keyhole, no handle, just a smooth black surface that shimmered like oil under moonlight. Her palm pulsed. The mark, faint until now, flared briefly, and the door understood. It did not open. It became open, and she stepped through. There was no ground, no sky, no ceiling, only space, an impossible void, lit from nowhere and everywhere at once. But she was not falling. She was held, cradled in place, by something she could not see, but which recognized her, like a memory she hadn't made yet. A voice emerged. No direction, no volume, just presence. You are not the first, but you are the youngest. Liora opened her mouth, but her voice did not follow. The presence responded anyway. There is no need to speak. You are heard. Fully, she thought. Where am I? The answer came not in words, but in images, unfolding gently, like petals in windless air, a map, a scroll. But the ink shifted and flowed, never staying still, landscapes bending, rivers changing course, mountains rising and falling, and at the edge a figure, cloaked in silence, drawing the map as it changed, not recording it, causing it. The voice again. You are in the cartographer's silence. the place where worlds are drawn. She floated, or rather, existed, within that space, not dreaming, not waking. A moment outside the page, below her, something stirred. A shape, vast, curved, like the hull of a sleeping ship. It was not made of wood, nor stone. It was made of possibility. Her mark glowed brighter. The ship rose, and she stood upon it. It had no helm, no sail, no wheel, and yet it moved, gliding through the blankness, the silence, the still. The walls of the void began to whisper, not in sound, but in memory. She saw Emmerich, older now, standing beneath a tree, in his kreth, writing in a book that vanished with each page turned. She saw the woman in the pool room again, her name drifting into her mind like wind into curtains. Liora. She saw the key she'd found on the market wall, still hanging in another world, waiting for another child. And then, she saw herself not as she was now, but later, a woman with hollowed eyes and fire in her hands. Walking through a city made of glass, she reached out to touch the vision in the ship, shuddered the world around her, cracked like frost beneath footfall. The silence became fragile. The map was no longer still. Storms of thought tore through the space, not clouds, but words, sentences, ideas, unspoken. Truths not yet born. They struck the ship, peeling back pieces of its hull. Liora clung to the mast, or what felt like one, as the storm whispered, "She is not ready. She does not remember enough. She is too young." Her voice rose in reply, not aloud, but deep from within. "I know I am small, but I remember." The storm paused, as if considering, then softened. The words scattered, the void calmed, and a shape emerged from the mist of memo. Library, not one built by hands, but by minds. Columns formed of spine-bound tomes, windows made of translucent pages, and at its center, a figure cloaked, still watching the ship docked, not with a sound, but with certainty. She stepped onto the platform. The figure turned, a man, tall and calm. His eyes not unkind, his face familiar. She knew him, though she had never seen him this close, immersive, but older still than in her vision. He nodded. "You've come far." She approached, her feet silent on the parchment floor. "I saw you in the mirror." He smiled faintly. "And I saw you in the tree." She looked around. "What is this place?" Emmerich glanced upward. Books floated above, spiraling like birds. "It is the archive of futures. Each path you might take has a shelf, each choice, a corridor." She turned slowly. "Thousands of halls, millions of pages. How do I know which one is mine?" Emmerich gestured to the wall. A mirror shimmered into view. But this time, it did not show her reflection. It showed possibilities. Her as a healer, as a builder, as a queen, as a wanderer, as a scholar. "You must choose," Emmerich said gently. "But the choice must be made in silence, without voices, without time, without fear." She stared at the mirror, felt the weight of each version of herself. Then, she closed her eyes, breathed, and listened. Not to sound, but to the stillness, beneath everything, and in that stillness, she knew. She opened her eyes. The mirror shimmered, then shattered, not in violence, but in resolution. The image cleared. One path glowed faintly. Emmerich nodded. "That is the one only you could see." She turned to him. "Will I forget?" He considered. "You may, but the mark will remember." She looked to her hand. It now pulsed with a different rhythm, one not of a question, but of a compass. She stepped toward the glowing door. Emmerich called softly, "When the sky turns ink and the stars go silent, remember, maps do not show the world, they shape it." And then, she stepped through. The world turned quietly, and the girl who dreamed in maps became the woman who would redraw them. The sky held still, stretched in a pale hush just before twilight, neither day nor night, like breath held in the lungs of the world. Liora stood beneath it, though she no longer stood as she once had. Her boots touched stone, but the ground was not the same, nor was she. The door behind her had vanished. The pages of the library had faded into sleep. There were no towers in sight, now only a road, old and cracked, winding back through the village where her name once carried nothing, but something had shifted. The cobblestones beneath her feet whispered as she walked, not words, not voices, but recognition, as if the earth remembered her footsteps before she made them. She followed the path, not by sight, but by rhythm. The mark on her palm pulsed faintly with every step, not glowing, not humming, just knowing. The village gate creaked open at her. Approach, and those who once passed her, without seeing, now paused. Their gazes lingered too long. Their conversations faltered. A child pointed, tugged at her mother's sleeve. The baker watched her with flour still clinging to her knuckles. No one spoke. Not until she reached the well in the village square, and there, leaning against the stone lip, as though waiting out a storm, stood a woman in a cloak too fine for the town, but worn with travel. Her hair was silver, not with age, but with the strange dust of faraway places. She looked up and smiled, not kindly, but knowingly. "You walked through the cartographer's silence," she said, as though noting the weather. Liora met her gaze. "I didn't know it had a name." "Most places worth walking through don't," the woman replied. She straightened, dusted off her palms. "I was told to watch for you." "By who?" The woman blinked slowly. "By the path." There were no more questions after that. Liora followed. The woman led her down a street she had known since childhood, though now it bent at a strange angle that hadn't been there before. A side alley curled where once was only a shuttered window. They walked in silence, and at the alley's end, a door circular made of bone wood, with a knot in its center that pulsed faintly in time with the mark on Liora's hand. The woman stepped aside. Liora opened it, and entered a room that breathed like the tower had. It was not a house, not a hall, it was a listening place. Inside, shelves lined with instruments, not musical ones, but devices for measuring that which could not be seen. A windglass, a memory gauge, a scale that weighed silences. At the center ran orb, held in place not by wires, but by will. It hovered above a pedestal made of woven metals, metals that twisted and turned like they remembered being alive. Liora stepped closer. The orb pulsed once, and unfolded, not physically, but in perception. Like a thought spreading open behind her eyes, it showed a landscape, not a real one, not yet, but possible. Mountains drawn in angles too sharp for nature, a river running uphill, a city shaped like a clock with no hands, and beneath it all, at the very center of the map, the mark.her mark.pulsing drawing the land into shape around itself. Liora staggered back. The woman spoke at last. "You're not just a keeper," she said quietly. "You're a shaper. I don't know what that means." Liora replied. The woman shrugged. Neither did the first. There was no need to ask who the first had been. Somewhere in her bones, Liora felt the name .emeric. But this was not his map. This was hers. They left the room as quietly as they had entered. The orb faded back into stillness. Outside, the village had begun to change. Not all at once, but in flickers, in seams. A window where no window had been. A lantern post now made of braided silverwood, though it had been iron just hours ago. Children playing a game whose rules Liora remembered. Inventing in a dream, though no one had taught it to them. The world had begun to bend around her, not obeying, but echoing. She understood, slowly, that this was not a gift. It was a burden. A responsibility she had drawn the map. Now the map began to draw her, that night. The stars did not appear. Instead, the sky filled with faint lines, lines of connection, as though the heavens themselves had become a chart, and each breath she took blink shifted the geometry slightly. She sat beneath the old tree by the square, the same one she had climbed as a child. Now its bark held faint runes, its leaves whispered in patterns, and then she felt it, a second pulse. Not from her, not from the mark, but from beneath, from below the ground. She pressed her hand to the soil, closed her eyes, and fell inward. She found herself standing on stone once more, but not the polished stone of the tower, This was older, cracked, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, a corridor lined with arches carved in languages she had never learned but somehow understood. Each arch glowed faintly as she passed. One showed the tower, another, the library, a third. A room of threads woven through space like spiderwebs made of memory, and at the end a doorway, not to another place, but to another version of this place, the village, the world her. She stepped through and emerged into silence, not absence, but fullness. The silence of understanding. Waiting, a figure stood ahead, shrouded in folds of ink-black cloth. Neither man nor woman, face obscured in their hand, a lantern but the flame inside cast no light, only shadows. Liora approached. The figure held the lantern out to her. She took it, and the moment she did, she saw not with eyes, but with knowing. Paths unfolding, decisions branching, each one shaping not just where she would go but what she would become. The figure whispered, just once. The cartographer may walk any road, but only once. Choose well. And vanished. She returned, not through a door, but through a breath, and woke beneath the tree. The sky was whole again. Stars returned, but each one now pulsed, softly, deliberately, as though waiting for her next step. Liora rose, and the cobblestones beneath her whispered, not in question but in answer. There are moments in the life of a pathfinder where the road does not split. It simply disappears, where choices cannot be weighed, only walked, where the horizon curls in on itself, and the future is no longer ahead, but within. It was just before dawn when Liora first saw him. No sound announced his arrival, no wind moved through the square, but there he stood in the shadow of the bell tower, which had not rung in 50 years. A man clothed in simple robes, gray as winter ash, with hands that looked older than time, and eyes that held storms like still water. He held no compass, no scroll, no satchel filled with instruments, and yet, when Liora looked upon him she knew, without knowing how, that he had walked further than any other soul she had met. He inclined his head, not in greeting, but in recognition, as if she were late to a conversation that had already begun. You've redrawn the well, he said quietly. Blinked, what? The old well, by the square. It used to lean east, now it leans west. She stared at the stone ring in the center of the square. He was right, I didn't mean to. She murmured, you didn't, he said. You became the meaning. And then he smiled, a small, tired thing. The kind of smile one uses after remembering something that almost made sense. They sat on the bench by the tree, the one with the runes in its bark above them. The sky was just beginning to color, not with light, but with possibility. The man leaned back, spoke as if to no one. You know, not all maps are made with ink and parchment. Liora watched him. I've learned that. He glanced at her. No, you've touched that, but you haven't learned it yet. She frowned. He continued. There are maps written in hunger, in grief, in the way a person walks after losing something too sacred to name. Maps in laughter, in habit, in the quiet choices no one sees. He paused, then looked her straight in the eyes. And there are maps drawn in memory. Yours and others. She felt her pulse in her palm, felt the mark tingle faintly. He reached into his sleeve and drew forth a small stone, flat, pale, unremarkable, but etched with a shape, not a symbol, not a word, a footprint, small, childlike. Do you know this? He asked. She stared. She did. She had stepped in wet clay, near the riverbank at age 7. No one had been around. She had forgotten until now. How? She began, but he tucked the stone away. Maps of memory, he whispered. You've begun drawing them without knowing. He stood, began walking. She followed. The village faded behind them, folding itself into quiet stillness. They took no trail, no marked road, just soil and wind, and the sound of breath. Hours passed without passage of time. The sky shifted above them like a veil being redrawn. And then, on the edge of a field where the grass grew taller than a man, The stranger stopped. He pointed there, buried halfway in the earth. Stood a door frame. No door, just the frame. As if the house it belonged to had simply dissolved. Liora approached. The frame hummed faintly as she neared, and the stranger said, "You remember this place?" "I've never been here," she replied. "But it remembers you." She stepped through, not into her room, but into herself, into a version of her mind. She had never explored, a field of turning pages, a ceiling of shifting glass, and standing at the center her reflection, but older, eyes heavier, smile gentler, clothing worn by miles. Not fashion, the reflection reached out, touched Liora's hand, and whispered, "Choose what to forget." A scroll appeared blank, waiting, and Liora knew, to carry the new map forward. She must leave some of the old behind. She thought of her mother's lullabies, of the sound of boots in the snow, of the way her father used to cut bread. She thought of Emmerich's gaze in the tower mirror, of the pulse beneath the cobblestones, of the echo in the silence. She let go. Of the fear that she would forget everything, because forgetting is not absence. It is space to make. She stepped back through the frame. The stranger nodded. "You chose well." She tilted her head. "I didn't say what I let go." He smiled. "You didn't have to." The map shifted. They walked again, past the orchard that now grew bones. Instead of fruit, past the river that whispered names. She hadn't spoken aloud. Past the mountain that rose only when watched. He spoke little, but when he did, the words planted themselves. Like seeds, not all markers are meant to guide. Some are meant to warn. There will come a time when your mark burns. Do not mistake pain for misdirection. When the wind forgets your name, sing to it anyway. And lastly, when the map fights back, listen to the silence under the resistance. That night, as they made camp beneath a sky filled with sideways stars, the stranger pulled out a bundle, wrapped in cloth made of woven dusk. Inside no maps, only questions, each written on parchment, so thin it nearly dissolved. He handed one to her. It read, "What shape does trust take when seen from a height?" She stared at it, then wrote, slowly, beneath the question, "A bridge, unfinished, but crossed anyway." The stranger smiled, then lay back, hands behind his head, and said, "I think the map is ready." Liora turned toward the sky, and saw, faintly, lines forming between the stars, not constellations, but corridors. She would walk them, not tomorrow now, without rising. Without stepping, she moved, through the sky, into it, across its breadth. The stranger beside her, or perhaps ahead, in the map, unfolding beneath them, not drawn with hands, but with being each heartbeat a landmark, each blink a direction. She laughed. Once the stars echoed it, and somewhere, in the distance, the tower turned its face to her again. Its light pulsed, like memory, like rhythm, like the sound of a map, still writing itself. The map no longer needed parchment. It was no longer confined to paper, or even to the delicate folds of memory. It had stretched, seamlessly, across the sky, across the land, across the breath between footsteps. It hummed in Liora's bones and threaded itself through her pulse. Each choice she made redrew its borders. Each silence she kept inked new paths through the unseen. The man without a map had vanished before first light. One blink, and he was no longer at her side. No footprints, no voice trailing after her in the wind. Only the last words he had given her, gently, as if returning something he'd borrowed. The map is ready, but Liora had learned not to trust finality. Not here. The map was never ready. Not truly. It was a living thing, growing as she grew, breathing with her questions, pulsing with her doubts. It responded to thought and silence alike. It listened for intent. It reconfigured itself around each step, waiting for her to catch up with herself. Now, she walked where no name could follow, a road that only appeared if she stopped looking, a path that unfolded only when she stopped asking where it led. And somewhere ahead, something impossible waited. Not a place, a presence. She followed the scent, of it not physical, but unmistakable. The air smelled like old thunder, the type that cracked just before a memory. And beneath it, something sweeter, a whisper of lavender soaked in ink. Parchment left too long in sun, the distant breath of a lullaby unfinished. She passed the stone arch that led to nowhere. She passed the tree that bled gold. She passed a reflection of herself, not cast in water, but in shadow, standing perfectly still. Watching her go, then came the city. Not marked on any chart, not spoken of in any archive. It waited for her, like an old friend with a secret to tell. The city that had no name. Its towers were crooked, leaned toward each other like conspirators. Roofs formed angles that defied geometry, jutting like the broken teeth of time. The cobblestones shimmered faintly, not with light, but with meaning. And above it all, lanterns glowed without fire. Their light pulsed with quiet thought. On every lamppost etched in soft gold, the same word appeared again and again, in a language she hadn't seen since the tower. Observe. No vendors called, no music played, no bells rang, but the city watched, not with eyes, not with motion, but with expectation. She moved through it in stillness. She was not a visitor. She was the answer to a question the city had not yet asked. She paused beneath a tall glass spire. It hummed, and from within it, she could hear the soft echo of her name, not spoken aloud, but thought in unison. That's when she saw it, beyond the rooftops, floating just above the clouds, its base buried in stars, a tower, but not one that grew from the earth. This one fell from the sky. Its roots were beams of light woven through a constellation. Its foundation hung, inverted, like a crystal icicle, suspended mid. The top, or what should have been the top, disappeared into the upper atmosphere, trailing mist and memory, and from its underside, suspended like the first note of a song, hung a door, a ladder stretched toward it. Not a ladder made of wood or rope, but of glyphs, language itself made vertical. Each symbol thrummed as she looked at it, unlocking feelings and questions she'd never dared voice. The ladder didn't ask her to climb, it asked her to understand upward. She placed one foot forward. The city below exhaled, and she rose. She ascended not with effort, but with revelation. Each step was not height, but insight. The glyphs beneath her feet responded to her breath, to her thought, to the cadence of her heartbeat. She saw visions as she ascended, a river made of forgotten promises, a stone that bore her childhood footprint, a mirror that showed only who she would have been, had she said yes instead of no. Each step forward was an unraveling, and then she reached it. The door beneath the sky. She touched it. It melted into sound. A long, clear note, like a bell rung underwater. She stepped through. The inside of the tower was quiet, not silent, but filled with the weight of meaning unspoken. It was not fast. It was meticulous. Each chamber was a concept. No clutter. Number. Distraction. The first room held questions never asked. The walls were lined with delicate glass jars, each filled with a breath. She opened one. A whisper greeted her. What would you become if no one was watching? She opened another. What color is fear before it has a name? The next room was filled with shadows, dancing, not chaotically, but with intent. This was the chamber of mistakes not yet made. In its center stood a version of her. Taller, older, more tired. This version smiled, then vanished. Down another hallway, a corridor of unmarked doors. Each bore a symbol she didn't know, yet somehow felt familiar. They didn't unlock with keys. They waited for awareness. At the far end sat a woman, older than time, younger than fire, draped in a robe the color of stars before they are born. She sat on a throne of compressed wind. She looked up and met Liora's eyes, and said, "Do you know your name yet?" Liora hesitated. The name she'd been given at birth felt distant. The name she'd earned in the tower had changed shape. The one she sought she had not yet spoken aloud. "No," she said, "but I remember who I was before I had one." The woman smiled. "Then you are ready." She lifted one hand and a door opened. Inside it, Nothing. No floor, no sky, no walls, just horizon, endless, blank, waiting, a plane of potential, a place where all maps begin. A quill appeared in Liora's hand, not given, not found, but grown, beneath her feet. The world shifted, waiting for her first mark. She lifted the quill, trembled slightly, then drew her first line, a line not of distance, but of decision, and with that, the tower stirred far beneath the city. Something long buried began to wake. Something that once spoke in ink, something that once whispered in gears. Emmerich's voice echoed, faintly, not his memory, but his question, Liora. Do you remember the rhythm? The first line was never just a beginning. It was a release of something old, of something patient, of something that had waited beneath centuries of silence for a hand steady enough to draw without fear. The moment Liora pressed the quill too, the blank horizon, the surface rippled, not as water does, but as memory might, if stirred gently. The line shimmered, then split. It forked outward into two directions, both impossibly straight, both glowing softly, with a light that did not reflect, but recalled, and from beneath the plane, a sound emerged. Faint, metallic, familiar, a gear turning in a room she had never seen. A clock unwinding backward, a voice saying her name, not as question, not as warning, but as invitation. Liora. She stood in the middle of the drawn axis, breath held in the middle of that name, and she remembered, not just the tower, not just the Iron Scholar. She remembered the hourglass that broke on its own. She remembered the scroll sealed in wax and dust, the one no hand dared open. She remembered Emmerich's voice, as it had been the first time she heard it, not from lips, but from the tower walls, shaped in echoes and humming stone. Now it returned, not as memory, as presence. Beneath the glowing plane, the surface cracked. The line she had drawn had not only summoned voice, it had split the foundation of the map from below. A spiral staircase rose. It formed out of symbols, each step a phrase she hadn't spoken aloud, but had once thought in a moment of uncertainty. She placed her foot on the first one. It held. She descended. The white light of the map slowly dimming above her, replaced by the cool indigo glow of something older. Stone walls closed around her, carved with glyphs she half recognized, remnants of her own dream. Language. The staircase turned inward, tightened, the air thickened, scented with rusted iron, aged parchment, and the faintest trace of lightning that hadn't yet struck at the bottom. A chamber, round, perfectly symmetrical. Its walls were neither stone nor metal. They breathed, slowly, and in the center, a throne of tangled wires and roots, and on it, slouched, like a forgotten thought, Emmerich. He was not young. He was not old. His body seemed forged from the same material as the tower itself, cracked glass and cooled brass, with veins that pulsed like molten ink. His face held time. His eyes were closed, but when she stepped across the threshold, his lips parted. "Did you bring the line?" he asked. Liora knelt beside him, the quill still glowing in her hand. "I did," she said. "But it drew itself." "No," Emmerich whispered. "It answered you." "That's different." He opened his eyes and Liora saw, not pupils, not irises, but entire maps reflected in them. Moving maps, breathing maps, each one humming, each one shaped like her. She didn't ask how he survived. She didn't ask why he was here, buried beneath a tower that had not been built, but grown downward from sky. She only asked, why did it wait until now? Emmerich. Smile was slow, because the line isn't just a path, he said. It's a cipher. He stood. If it could be called standing. The throne dissolved behind him. Returning to the chamber wall, he gestured, and the floor beneath them peeled. Open, not violently, but gently, as if it had simply forgotten it was solid. Beneath it, another world. Not a tunnel, not a pit, a room of language. Liora followed him down. The air here shimmered with intent. Words floated, not on pages, but as free symbols suspended in air. Some turned when she looked at them. Others whispered meanings without sound. In the center, a vast structure, spherical, rotating, glowing with soft blue flame. Is it an engine? Liora asked. It was, Emmerich said. Now it's a question. He walked slowly toward it, his fingertips trailing behind through the floating script. This was the first model, he said. Before the tower, before the map, before I knew. Your name, Liora, turned to him. You built this. I found it, he said. But it spoke your name long before I understood what that meant. He paused, then looked at her fully. I think you're not just part of the cipher, he said. I think you are the cipher. Liora tried to speak, but the words drifted away. Unformed, the engine pulsed brighter. It began to unravel, gently. Threads of light peeling from its surface, like petals from a blooming flower. The room around them responded, lighting up symbol by symbol. Lines appeared on the walls, not straight ones, not cartographer's lines. These were wild, organic, drawn with emotion rather than intent. The floating glyphs converged, and then they formed a voice, not Emmerich's, not hers. The tower itself, the cipher has returned. The words were not spoken, they were felt. In the lungs, behind the eyes, under the skin, and with it, the last answer. Liora turned to Emmerich. What answer? He met her gaze, solemn. Why the tower was built, he said. Why the maps began disappearing. He placed his hand on the quill in her grasp. And why only you could redraw the first line. Suddenly, light surged from the glyphs above. A memory tore itself from Liora's mind, not hers alone, but shared. She saw a city burning, not from fire, but from erased understanding. Scholars bound in chains of their own ink. Towers crumbling into libraries. Libraries closing themselves. A map that folded inward and vanished, leaving only silence in its place. And she saw herself not as she was, but as a constant, in every failed age. In every forgotten version of the tower, she had always returned. Always with the quill. Always with the question. This was not her first time drawing the line. It was her 1000th. The engine shuddered, glyphs flashed. The walls bloomed with a new map, not of terrain, not of cities, but of possibility. Liora stepped forward, breath catching in her throat. What do I do now? Emmerich looked to the center of the sphere, now cracked open like a seed. You write what comes next. She raised the quill again, but before the ink touched air, she whispered, Will it hold this time? Emmerich's hand covered hers. Only if you believe the line is alive. And so she began again, not from scratch, but from understanding. The first word was not north. It was not begin. It was not even truth. It was remember. And with it, the cipher opened completely. Not just to her, but to the world. The word remember shimmered in the air like dew suspended on a silver thread. And in that single word, the tower stirred. Not in stone, but in purpose. A quiet seismic shift. As if every beam and passage and breathless hallway realigned itself around. A single axis, her Liora, didn't write another word right away. She let the first one echo. Let it bloom, let it settle not just across the map, but inside the spaces she hadn't yet named within herself. Remember, it was a command, it was a kindness, it was a key. Beneath her feet, the floor dissolved, not into collapse, but into clarity. The glyphs and gears softened. The language peeled itself from walls and ceilings. Circling gently around her head like curious moths returning to flame, Emmerich stood behind her, though not as he had been. He was younger now, or older, or untouched by time. No longer the man from the journals. No longer the figure half swallowed by machines. Now he stood as he truly was. Not builder, not scholar, but guardian. A protector of a door that could only be opened from the inside, and Liora had finally turned the handle. The tower began to unfold. Literally, each wall folded outward, petal by petal, revealing not destruction or secret vaults, but sky. A tapestry of night that held not stars, but windows. Each one, a memory. Each one a line someone once drew. Each one blinking softly in the infinite dark. And from every direction, light streamed inward. Not harsh, not blinding, but thoughtful, as if each beam had first asked for permission to touch. Liora stood at the center of this now bloomed structure, her quill still in hand, the map beneath her feet now spreading outward like a root system, blooming in concentric rings of possible futures. But none of this, not the glyphs, not the tower, not even the sky made of memories, answered the one question she'd carried since the beginning. Why her? Why had the tower sung her name before she knew it? Why had the cipher only opened to her hand? Why did the lines always return to her, no matter how far they traveled? Emmerich walked to her side, silent, reverent, and then finally he said, "Because you are not from the tower." He looked at her, not with awe, but with familiarity. "You are what the tower became when it longed to remember itself." The sentence hung in the air like a bell toll. The weight of it cracked something open in her, not pain, not confusion, but recognition. She had felt the tower tremble with her heartbeat. She had known how to open doors without keys. She had understood languages no one had ever taught her. She had returned here, not to learn, but to wake, because she was the cipher, not merely its wielder, not merely its student, but its echo, its daughter, its voice. And so, the ending began. Not as a closing, but as a return, one by one. The windows in the sky flickered, each one a life, each one a moment where someone, somewhere, reached for understanding and found only silence. Now those silences became pages. Liora lifted her hand, not to write, but to listen. Each glyph floating around her rearranged itself mid-air. They formed not a sentence, but a shape, a spiral, that mirrored the map's origin, a coil of meaning too vast to be captured in ink alone. Emmerich stepped back, giving her space. "You don't need me anymore," he said softly. She looked at him and smiled. "You were never just guiding me," she replied. "You were walking beside me, as I will for the next." He nodded, peace glowing in his chest like a lantern relit. Then he faded, not as one dies, but as one finishes reading the last page of a book and quietly closes the cover. Liora turned to the quill one last time. This time, it hovered above a page that had no boundaries. A map without edges. A canvas made of everything that had ever been forgotten. And she wrote, not in glyphs, not in ink, but in intention. Her line did not mark a road, or a city, or a country. It marked remembrance. It drew a spiral that circled back to every time she had been lost, and then it extended outward, a straight line, pure, unwavering, forward. The tower shuddered, but it did not collapse. Instead, it breathed, for the first time in ages. It exhaled, its stones, no longer burdened by secrecy, its corridors, no longer heavy with unspoken answers, its ceiling, now gone, replaced by open sky and the vast reach of memory, and across the world. Things changed, not all at once, but with gentle certainty. Forgotten texts reappeared on shelves, long thought empty. Children whispered truths they shouldn't have known, yet did. Maps that had been blank for centuries began to shimmer faintly in the hands of those who truly sought. Somewhere, a young girl traced a spiral in the dirt with a stick and smiled for no reason. Somewhere else, an old man sat up from a restless sleep and said a name he hadn't spoken in 50 years, Liora. And far beneath it all, in the deepest part of the tower's now open heart, the engine of thought pulsed once more, softly, steadily, not waiting for commands, but listening, listening, for the next voice brave enough to write. And Liora. She did not stay in the tower. She walked back across the map she had drawn. Each line now hummed beneath her feet. Each step she took became a bridge. For another to cross, she was no longer a seeker. She was no longer lost. She was no longer learning. The rhythm, she was the rhythm. And wherever she walked, the world remembered itself. One word at a time, one line at a time, until all silence became story, and all endings returned to their beginning.